Hello everyone, my name is Lisa and this video contains tips on how to write the task 1 for your writing paper of an English placement examination. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge that many of the diagrams, examples, and sentences were taken from various websites and various sources and do not belong to me. I have edited or adapted some of the writing for the purpose of this video. Now, what are English placement examinations? Examples of English placement examinations are IELTS, TOEFL. In Malaysia, you have MUET, and various institutions and countries have English placement examinations of their own. The purpose of these examinations are to ensure that the learners are competent up to a certain level of English before they further their studies, whether at the undergraduate level or postgraduate level. I'm going to refer to some terminology that I will use in this video, such as heading or title, axis or axis, key, static or dynamic. Static refers to charts in which the data does not show change over time, whereas dynamic refers to data that does show change over time. Now, in this pie chart, you only have one pie chart. The heading or title is Social Media Users in Jamestown in the year 2018. The pie chart is divided into different segments or sectors and is colored in various colors. And you have the key here, which gives the information about the items in the pie chart. Now, it does not say what these items are, but the title says social media users. So in the key, what you can infer is that it refers to different age groups of people. Now, here you have two pie charts. One is in 1995, one is in 2005. Now, these pie charts are dynamic pie charts because you can see changes in the percentages between the 2 years given. Now, there's no key here. You only have different colors for the different segments, but the names of the items are given outside the pie charts. Now, for bar and line charts, the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, usually will show you whether a chart is static or dynamic. And you need to be careful whether in the chart there is a reference to the future, whether there is a projection or there is a prediction. You also need to be careful with the information on the y-axis because it could be in percentages or thousands or even millions. You have a bar chart here. The title is Enrollment on MT1 Music Technology. Now, it does not say what it is or where it is. And the x-axis gives you the names of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries. Now, before you start writing, look at the y-axis, the vertical axis. Number of foreign students enrolled. So this is not about different countries, but about students from different countries which have enrolled for this music technology course. And not only that, the dark blue in the key represents males, whereas the light blue represents females. Now, how many males are from Finland? Only one. How many females? Is the numbers of females 6 females? No. In this bar chart, you need to subtract the number of males. Here, one male. So only 5 female learners are from Finland. So you need to be careful about these things before you start writing. In this bar chart, the x-axis gives you the years. So this one is a dynamic bar chart, whereas this is a static bar chart. So this gives you the years, the fitness membership for women and men from 1970 to 2000, and the y-axis shows you the figures are in thousands. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier. Look at this, 2035. From the x-axis, at first it looks like a static chart, but the key tells you that this is a dynamic chart. And this is rather strange, 2035. But when I'm doing this video, it is the year 2020. So here you have a projection or a prediction. So the title is percentage of population age 65 and over in these 5 places. So let's take one. Let's take Wales perhaps. So in Wales in 1985, because it's in the past, we use past tense. Now it's not exactly 15%, it's slightly over. So we can say slightly over 15% of the population of Wales in 1985 was age 65 years and over, and this is expected to increase to over 25% by the year 2035. So you need to write very carefully when you have a projection or a prediction in your chart. Now this is also a bar chart, but you can see it is different from the others I showed you previously. The x-axis has the numbers, the y-axis has the names, and the title tells you medical research funding in Sunderland, and this is important, it gives you the word millions. So you look to the numbers here, not in the y-axis as in the previous charts. So when you write, you need to be careful to say 50 million or 100 million. If you just say 50 or 100, that would be inaccurate or wrong writing, and that will bring your grade down. So this is about medical research funding, so it must be to do with money. So let's take TB, which is about half between 0 and 50. So let's say about 25, and it's not just 25, but about $25 million was allocated to research on TB in Sunderland, and this was the lowest amount of money allocated compared to all the diseases. Now, line graphs are always dynamic. Now, the title tells you consumption of fast food by Australian teenagers. But look at the chart carefully. X-axis gives you the years, well and good, very straightforward. but the y-axis has something on it. Number of times eaten per year. So it's not the number of teenagers, but number of times a certain fast food was eaten per year. So if you say, for example, in 19, let's choose a year, 1975, at the beginning of the period, and you say fewer than 10 Australian teenagers ate hamburgers. That would be wrong because actually it's the number of times these Australian teenagers ate hamburgers. So at the beginning of the period in 1985, hamburgers were eaten fewer than 10 times by Australian teenagers, and that increased up to nearly 1985, increased drastically, then increased more slowly, and then leveled off. Now, here you have the title US Energy Consumption by Fuel 1980 to 2030. So, again, projection. Now we are in the year 2020, so the projection begins from here to here for these 10 years. The x-axis is straightforward, but look at the units given in the y-axis. So it's not just 10 or 15 or 20 units, but quadrillion units. So for example, if you have for petrol and oil, you can say at the beginning of the period in 1980, 35 quadrillion units of petrol and oil were consumed in the US, and this decreased until 1985, and then you can analyze the rest of the chart. Students often ask what they should mention. Now, it would be helpful, and I strongly recommend that you brainstorm. You should pick out items that stand out, that seem interesting, like the highest, or the most, or the lowest, or the least, or something that increases suddenly or drops suddenly, something that looks interesting, that catches your eye. So list them down, then pick and choose, and then organize your writing. Now, what can you mention? For both static and dynamic, you can mention these things: highest or the most, lowest or the least, something that is same or similar. You can do simple math like subtraction or minus. You can do ratios, you can divide, you can even do times. Now, only for dynamic charts, you can write about something increasing or decreasing, or not changing or showing fluctuation. You cannot do that with static charts. Students sometimes worry that they need to mention each and every point. Now, please take note that you do not need to. You pick and choose, and you write about those points, and that should be enough. We move on to organizing your writing. Now, this could depend on the placement examination you are sitting for, but I would recommend these in general. You need to write usually about 150 words. Introduction and conclusion, keep them short and simple, 2 to 3 sentences. The body can be one or more paragraphs. You can write just one paragraph in the body, but I would not recommend that because that would make your writing very boring. Now, in the introduction, you need to be direct. Do not beat around the bush. Get straight to the point. Mention what the chart or graph is showing. You need to paraphrase the question. and you can give a general description or overview in a sentence. Now, if you're taking IELTS, you will need to write a whole paragraph for the overview. Now, if you're writing just a general introduction and not for IELTS, the second sentence in your introduction can be the overview. Now, what to mention in your overview sentence? Look from the beginning to the end of the sentence of the chart, to help determine what to write in your overview. So, if you look at a diagram like this is interesting. Look at it, right? So, starts off high, ends low, starts off in the middle, ends up in place number 1, start off in the lowest place and moves to the second place. So how can you write the overview? First sentence, the given line graph depicts the Australian teenagers' habit of fast food consumption between 1975 and 2000. So here is the overview sentence. Now this is not for IELTS. Remember, IELTS you have to write a whole paragraph for the overview. So you can see in the chart that the popularity of hamburgers is the green one, rose dramatically, whereas the popularity of fish and chips gradually decreased. Okay, this is on fish and chips, so it decreased. So that's the overview, the general pattern. Now, writing the body paragraphs, I would recommend, as I mentioned before, more than one paragraph. You can compare and or contrast. You can use comparatives and superlatives, and you can use proportions. Example of a comparison where something is the same. The demand for pizza was constant, so it did not change, right? And now in the body, you are giving numbers to support what you're saying. Now here is a contrast. You start with on the other hand to show it's a contrast, right? That rose substantially. So this is the contrast. Comparatives is when you're comparing two things. So here you're comparing hamburgers and fish, hamburgers and pizzas with fish and chips. So after 1985, these two were more popular than fish and chips. Superlatives, comparing 3 or more. So you had 3 types of fast food here. So fish and chips were the most popular fast food among teenagers of Australia in 1975. An example of using proportions, by 2000, the number of times fish and chips were eaten by the teens was about 2/5 the number of times they ate hamburgers. We look at other examples of proportions later on. Here's the example of writing a body paragraph. Right, so let's look at this. Right. According to the graph, in 1975, so that's the beginning, fish and chips were the most popular. Moreover, at that time, so now you are giving the number or the fact to support it. After that, what happened is popularity decreased. Then after that, it increased slightly in this year. Then the demand fell significantly. So you're giving further facts. And at the end of the period, hamburgers and pizzas were more popular than fish and chips. So your second body paragraph. So here's the contrast. Okay, so now what's happening? Popularity of pizzas and hamburgers rose. Demand for pizza was constant. So here's the number to support it. exponentially increased, that means increased a lot. So you're giving the number to support that. Then the end of the period is the proportion. Okay, so you're having the trends, the numbers to support them. The conclusion, two sentences. A general sentence to sum it up, and then an overview. Right? So here's a comparison side by side of the introduction and the conclusion. So here is the first sentence in the introduction, and here is the second sentence. Here is the conclusion, first sentence, and here is the overview. So they are written differently. The sentence structures are different, and this will help you, if you can do that, to get a better grade. Now, students often ask how to get a high band or a good result, or even just to pass. Now, three factors are important: the content, the vocabulary, and the grammar that you use in your writing. Now, what does content mean? Content refers to the points you use in your writing. It needs to be analysis, like mentioned before. Is something the highest or the most? Is something the lowest, or perhaps even the second lowest or the third lowest? In dynamic charts, is something increasing or decreasing? If you just give a straightforward statement of facts, that will not give you a good grade. Now, moving on to the second item I mentioned about your choice of vocabulary. Now, you use the phrase the amount of with uncountable nouns, and that always takes singular verbs such as is or was. For example, the amount of oil produced in Brunei in 2004 was, because oil is an uncountable subject. Other examples would be like sugar, or water, or flour. Now, the phrase the number of is for countable items, but that too takes a singular verb. Now, this can be confusing for some learners. Now, for example, in this sentence, the number of students in that school is, sometimes learners confuse this and use were or are because they think that they should do that as this is a plural word. But because of this phrase, the number of, the grammar rule in English is that you need to use a singular verb. Now, using percent and percentage. You use percent after the number. Of course, you can also just use the symbol. You do not really need to write it out in words. Now, the phrase, the percentage of, is used like this. The percentage of students in Indian schools is, and then you may give the number. You can also change noun and adjective phrases into verbs and adverbs to create a range of expressions. For example, a slight increase, adjective, noun, to increase slightly, verb, adverb. Now, if you are going to use past tense, this will become increased. And also try to vary your vocabulary. So using increase all the time, you could use go up or rise or even grow and other vocabulary words that I'm sure that your lecturer or teacher has told you. Now here's an example when you're using adjective or noun. You need to begin the sentences with there. There was a gradual rise. Okay, this is a noun, not a verb. There has been a sharp drop. You use the article a, adjective, noun. And you're using adverb, verb. The price of property fell sharply. Verb, adverb. The percentage of home values dropped dramatically. Verb, adverb. Now, tenses. Which tenses to use? In your very first sentence, the chart shows, the graph shows, that is simple present. The following sentences you can use simple past. Now, in the body of your writing, you can use various tenses, and you might need to use simple future if it's a dynamic chart with projections or predictions. In the conclusion, you can use simple past tense, and you might need to use simple future if your dynamic chart shows prediction or projection. Now, here are some examples of comparatives and superlatives. British people spent just above $120,000 on TV sets. In comparison, this figure was much lower for Italy at 50,000. So you're comparing two countries, Britain and Italy. So you're using comparative. You use comparatives when you're comparing two things. Second example, fewer people bought cars in 2011 compared to 2013. So you're comparing 2 years. Superlatives, when you're comparing three or more things. For example, price of oil reached a peak and again touched the lowest point, amounting only $10. So between February and July, so more than 3 months. So you're using the superlative. Second example, highest number of books sold in July, lowest in December. So between July and December, if you're looking at every month, this is more than 3 months. Therefore, this is again the superlative. Like sales or superlative songs dropped the least, and the figures are compared for all three singers. So comparing three singers, we are using superlatives. Now, words which are uncountable, you use less. If countable, better to use fewer. For example, mobile phones are countable, so you can say fewer mobile phones. And then the verb has to be plural, were bought. Now, oil is uncountable, better to use less oil. Uncountable subjects take singular verbs, so was consumed. Prepositions. Now, for years or even months, you would say in 2010, in December, in January. But for a specific date, on 20th March, on 1st of December, then you would use N. For times of day, you would use at. Referring to a specific number at a specific point, then you would say use at. The figure stood at perhaps 100 or 200 or something like that. Now, by 2010, so this would be for dynamic charts, the number of participants had increased or decreased. You can do some simple math. Had dropped by 200 people. Perhaps at first you had 500 people. Then, after a certain period, it dropped to 300 people. So, it had dropped by 200 people. So, this is like at, referring to a specific number at a specific point in time. The number had risen to, say, 400 or 500 or whatever. So this is some math. There was a difference of 112 units. So it could be addition or subtraction. Now from goes with to. Many students write from until. Please do not do that because from goes with to. So from 1996 to 1998. Alternatively, you could use between and. It's the same meaning, synonym. Between 1996 and 1998. Now, transitions help to make your writing flow, sound smoother. These are some examples, but of course, there are many others. Now, these are some helpful phrases when you want to write about proportions. I've not included every possible proportion, but only some common useful ones. Now, exactly a quarter would be 25%, so any number around that, you could say almost a quarter. 1/3 would be 33.33%, so this is close to it. You could say nearly 1/3. Exactly half would be 50%. So a number close to that, you could say around a half, just under a half, or like for this, just over a half. 3/4 would be 75%, and you could say nearly 3/4. Notice that for quarters, because it's three more than one, you need to use the plural form. There are other numbers, of course, like 10%, you could say 1/10, 20% is 1/5, 40% would be 2/5, FIFTHS. Now, do you need to give reasons for something or a point? You do not need to. You do not need to explain based on your general knowledge or any reading that you might have done. Now, many students ask that question, why did I not pass although I'm sure I wrote well? It could have been due to these reasons. Perhaps it was not analysis. Perhaps it was just a statement of facts. Or perhaps the student wrote sentences which were very simple. A student would need to write a mixture of compound and complex sentences with few grammatical errors, with a wide or good range of vocabulary and relatively few grammatical mistakes. Alternatively, it could have been due to wrong analysis. Perhaps the chart was static, but the student wrote like it was a dynamic chart. Perhaps the y-axis did not give percentages, but in the writing, the student kept mentioning percentages. Perhaps the numbers were in millions or thousands, but the student left it out of the writing. Or perhaps the student included irrelevant information like explaining the reason for the facts that are given in the writing. So these are some of the common reasons why a student does not do well in task 1 writing. It is important to remember that you don't need to describe everything because that would make your writing boring. Or secondly, it helps to add transitions so that your writing has flow. Some examples or useful expressions are given here. I'm sure they have been covered in the slide previously. Now, you cannot also ignore spelling and punctuation because carelessness in this could bring your grade down. In the introduction, be sure to paraphrase the question and do not just blindly copy it because then you might have errors in your sentence structure. You could use one of these following items to begin the very first sentence. And remember, if you have pie charts, two pie charts, then the verb has to agree with the plural subject and has to be show and not shows. This brings to the end of the video, and I do hope that this video has given you some useful tips and information that will be useful to you when you do your task 1 writing for your English placement examination. Remember, these tips are in general and you might need to adapt them according to the examination that you are sitting for. I wish you all the very best in your examination and I hope that all of you will do well.